Have you ever sat with the question, how far does God's grace and mercy, His love and care extend? In other words, who does it include within itself? My dear sisters and brothers, as I sat in prayer with the readings of today, what came to my mind was this idea that every prophet is sent to the whole world, to all the nations, because God belongs to all and all belong to God. That's what I gather from the first reading of the day, Jeremiah. And the gospel is but an amplification of that message. A little historical context might be helpful. Towards the end of the Old Testament history, there arose a debate, or call it a discussion, among the Israelites, the Jews, as to how far God's love extended. They didn't ask that question in that metaphysical way, but they tried to understand that from the point of view of their own love extending to include those around. And as a result of this discussion, or call it debate, there were two schools of thought. The first school said that in order to preserve the purity of worship and faith of our religion, foreigners needed to be kept out, away with the pagans, away with other religions, and eventually it would become away with other ethnicities. And they would quote the example of the debacle of King Solomon, whose foreign wives with their back home gods would turn his heart away from the one true God. Foreigners are a bad influence because they brought in idolatry and would turn away the mind of the people from the one true God of Israel. And as opposed to this, there was another group that said that God's love is unlimited. It is limitless. It is boundless. It has no horizons. It is endless. God belongs to all, and everyone belongs to God, and so all were welcome into the worship and faith of Yahweh. And there was this tension. And what would they do? They would show the example of Prophet Jonah, who was very unwilling to go to Nineveh, a pagan nation, to prophesy. And later on, he would learn the hard way the mind and the heart of God, that God would love all, that God's love extended to include everyone. They would also propose the example of Ruth, a Moabite woman who would be married into the family of David and would actually serve as the ancestor of Christ himself. A great-grandson would be King David. And so you see this tension. That tension still exists in our midst. Take a look at the Bible Belt. Does it welcome Jews? Does it welcome Muslims? Does it welcome foreigners? Does it welcome people of other ethnicities? Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to really understand it. It was a good idea on the part of the Jews to keep the foreigners as a caution, as a precaution, because they brought in with them idolatry. Intention was good. But eventually what happens? It goes on to extend not just other religions, but other ethnicities. And their Puritanism becomes a kind of a xenophobia. And we find that in our midst today, where we look upon foreigners and spurn them. We look upon people of other faith with suspicion. We don't trust people who are not like us, who don't behave like us, who don't speak as we speak. And sometimes, I come from Oakland, we don't even trust people who live on the other side of the freeway. Sisters and brothers, we worship one God. Does the love of God extend to include everybody? Let's come to Jesus himself, who comes bursting onto the scene. And what does he say? All he says is that a prophet is sent to the whole world. The word should be spoken to everyone, to all creation. And he says that God's love is abundant. It is proficient. It is plentiful. It includes all. That the love of God is limitless. It doesn't discriminate between people and people, between religion and religion, much less between ethnicity and ethnicity. And we see that time and again with Jesus, especially in the gospel according to St. Luke. In a nutshell, Jesus would say that when the love of God comes to a boundary, it goes beyond the fence. It crosses borders and it fills the whole universe. In other words, Jesus says, God is Catholic. And by Catholic, I mean God is universal. A God who makes the sun, you remember, shines on all, the good and the bad, who sends his rain on the virtuous and the vicious. A God who sows abundantly in every type of soil, meaning in all hearts. A God who is a father to the elder son as well as to the younger son. A God who is Catholic. And in that sense, am I a Catholic? Are you a Catholic? Is our love universal? To conclude, there is this lovely story that comes from the Hasidic tradition. The crossing of the Red Sea was just over. And Moses, as a good leader who would be the last one to leave the scene, looks around to check if everyone had been saved. And he would find this one figure looking over the Red Sea, intense. And as he goes close, he recognized that image to be God himself. And God is weeping, looking at the Red Sea. And Moses says, God, what are you weeping over? And God, ignoring Moses, still looking at the Red Sea, would say, I'm weeping for my children of Egypt. That is a God that speaks to us in the first reading. That is the God who sends us as prophets to the whole world, to all the nations, to all the peoples. And that is the God whose embodiment, personification, that Jesus is in our midst. Now, in that sense, do I bring good news to the poor? Do I bring good news to the captives? Do I bring freedom to those who are imprisoned? Not just within our own clan, not our own ethnicity, not our own clan, not our own nation, but all over. Can I really look upon persons of another country, persons of another faith, persons that I don't quite like and say, God loves you, and therefore I am forced to love you, and I love you? That would be spreading the gospel. That is the good news that comes in the gospel of the day. Now tell me, is that a good news for you? It may not be a pleasant news to look upon our neighbor, to look upon our enemy, to look upon those who oppose us, to those that want to destroy us and say, God loves you. You belong to God. God belongs to all. But that is inevitable, unavoidable, for that is truth. For God, at the end of the day, is Catholic. He is universal. And so I ask you, how far does your love extend? When it comes to a border, does it penetrate that fence, that border, and flow to the other? Do you, like Jesus, who always went to the other side of Galilee, try to go to the other side and be present to people? Ask yourself this question. God is Catholic and his love is universal. Am I Catholic? Is my love unlimited and universal?